There comes a moment in your life when your strength runs out, when your plans collapse, when the doors you prayed for stay closed, and when the people you leaned on disappear. And in that moment, God whispers, move your hands off of it. Let me take over. Some of you are exhausted because you're trying to control what only God can command. You're carrying what heaven never asked you to carry. You're fighting battles that belong to the Lord. But today, the Spirit of God is saying, if you let me take over everything, I will prove to you that I never left your side. When we talk about letting God take over your mind, we are stepping into one of the deepest and most transformative areas of spiritual surrender, because the mind is the control center of your life. Everything you do, everything you feel, and everything you believe flows through your thoughts. Long before a situation manifests in your reality, it first takes shape in your thinking. That is why the enemy does not begin by attacking your future, your family, or your finances. He begins by whispering into your mind. He plants seeds of fear, seeds of doubt, seeds of insecurity. And if those seeds are not surrendered to God, they grow into strongholds that shape how you see yourself, how you see God, and how you see your circumstances. Many people are not defeated in life because of external opposition. They are defeated because of internal agreement with the wrong voices. And the tragedy is that they do not even realize their mind has become a battlefield where fear speaks louder than faith and anxiety speaks louder than truth. Your mind was never designed to carry the weight of everything you are trying to control. Yet so many people wake up already overwhelmed because their thoughts are racing with worry about tomorrow, regret about yesterday, and pressure about today. The mind becomes crowded with what-if scenarios, worst-case imaginations, and constant mental noise that drains spiritual strength. When you do not let God take over your mind, you end up trying to solve spiritual burdens with natural reasoning, and that is a battle you will always lose. Human logic cannot outthink divine peace. Overanalysis cannot produce supernatural calm, and self-effort cannot silence spiritual anxiety. This is why even strong believers can feel mentally exhausted while still loving God, because they are praying with their mouth but wrestling with their thoughts. They speak faith publicly, but internally they are negotiating with fear. Letting God take over your mind does not mean you will never face negative thoughts. It means negative thoughts will no longer have authority over you. There is a difference between a thought entering your mind and a thought ruling your mind. Thoughts will come, but they do not have to stay. Fear may knock, but it does not have to live there. Doubt may whisper, but it does not have to dominate your decisions. When you surrender your mind to God, you are essentially changing the leadership of your inner world. Instead of your emotions leading, God's truth leads. Instead of your past speaking the loudest, His promises speak the loudest. Instead of anxiety controlling your reactions, peace governs your responses. Many people believe their stress is caused only by their situation, but often their stress is magnified by their interpretation of the situation. Two people can face the same storm, yet one collapses under pressure while the other remains steady. The difference is not always the size of the storm, it is the condition of the mind. A mind surrendered to God sees challenges as temporary and purposeful, while a mind controlled by fear sees challenges as permanent and destructive. When God takes over your mind, He does not always remove the storm immediately, but He transforms how you think in the storm. And that shift alone can preserve your strength, your faith, and your stability. The enemy understands that if he can control your thoughts, he can influence your choices. If he can influence your choices, he can shape your direction. That is why the mental battle is so strategic. He does not always need to destroy your life openly. He only needs to convince you quietly that you are alone, forgotten, or incapable. Once a person believes those lies long enough, they begin to withdraw, overthink, and live beneath their calling. But when God takes over your mind, lies lose their power because truth becomes your foundation. You begin to recognize that not every thought deserves agreement. Not every fear deserves attention. Not every mental voice deserves your trust. There are moments when your mind becomes your greatest source of torment, replaying past failures, reminding you of mistakes, and predicting negative outcomes that have not even happened. This mental replay creates emotional exhaustion. You may look calm on the outside while your thoughts are in chaos on the inside. That internal chaos affects your sleep, your focus, your decisions, and even your spiritual sensitivity. But when you surrender your mind to God, something sacred happens. Your thinking begins to slow down. Your reactions become less impulsive. Your inner world becomes less noisy. It is not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your mind is no longer carrying burdens it was never meant to hold. Letting God take over your mind also means releasing the illusion of control. Overthinking is often rooted in the desire to control outcomes. You replay conversations, analyze possibilities, and imagine scenarios because you want certainty. But certainty is not found in excessive thinking. It is found in trusting God's sovereignty. When God governs your mind, you stop obsessing over outcomes and start trusting divine timing. You stop trying to mentally solve everything and start resting in the assurance that God is already ahead of you. This does not make you passive, it makes you peaceful. It does not remove responsibility, it removes unnecessary mental pressure. Another powerful shift that happens when God takes over your mind is the transformation of your self-perception. Many people carry hidden narratives in their thoughts that say, I am not enough, always fail, or nothing ever works for me. These thoughts become internal scripts that shape behavior. But when your mind is surrendered to God, those scripts are rewritten. You begin to see yourself through the lens of purpose instead of insecurity. You begin to speak to yourself with faith instead of criticism. You stop defining yourself by past seasons and start aligning your identity with God's truth. This internal transformation affects how you walk, how you speak, and how you respond to challenges. Mental surrender also protects you from emotional extremes. When your mind is not anchored in God, every situation can feel overwhelming. A small setback can feel like total failure. A delay can feel like rejection. A challenge can feel like defeat. But when God takes over your mind, emotional stability increases. You still feel deeply, but you are not controlled by every emotion that passes through you. You develop spiritual resilience. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to pray before panicking. You learn to trust before assuming the worst. This emotional discipline is not natural. It is the result of a mind aligned with God's presence. There is also a sacred peace that enters your life when God governs your thoughts. This peace is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It exists even in uncertainty. It remains even in waiting seasons. It strengthens you even when answers are delayed. This kind of peace is not produced by positive thinking alone. It is produced by spiritual surrender. When your mind is constantly filled with worry, your body experiences tension. But when your mind rests in God, your entire being experiences relief. Your breathing becomes calmer. Your decisions become clearer. Your reactions become wiser. This is the practical impact of letting God take over your mind. Furthermore, when God takes over your mind, your focus shifts from problems to purpose. Instead of magnifying obstacles, you begin to recognize opportunities for growth. Instead of dwelling on what is missing, you start appreciating what is present. Instead of being consumed by fear of the future, you become anchored in faith for the journey. This shift does not mean challenges disappear. It means your mental posture changes. And that posture determines how you move through life. Another dimension of mental surrender is learning to filter what you allow into your mind. Your thoughts are shaped by what you consume, what you listen to, and what you repeatedly focus on. If your mind is constantly exposed to negativity, comparison, and fear-driven content, your internal world becomes heavy. But when you invite God to take over your mind, you become more intentional about guarding your thoughts. You begin to value peace over mental noise. You begin to protect your focus. You begin to reject influences that disturb your spiritual clarity. This is not isolation, it is wisdom. It is also important to understand that letting God take over your mind is a daily decision, not a one-time moment. Every day, thoughts will try to pull you toward fear, doubt, and anxiety. Every day, situations will test your mental stability. And every day, you must choose surrender over self-reliance. This ongoing surrender builds spiritual maturity. Over time, you notice that things that once triggered panic now produce prayer. Situations that once caused overthinking now produce trust. Challenges that once overwhelmed you now strengthen you. When God takes over your mind, your prayer life becomes deeper because you are no longer praying from panic, but from faith. Your worship becomes more sincere because your mind is less distracted by worry. Your decisions become wiser because they are not rushed by fear. And your faith becomes stronger because it is no longer shaken by every negative thought. This transformation does not make you perfect, it makes you anchored. Ultimately, surrendering your mind to God is an act of trust. It is saying, Lord, my thoughts are limited, but your wisdom is infinite. My understanding is incomplete, but your knowledge is perfect. My perspective is narrow, but your vision is eternal. And when you truly live from that posture, mental burdens begin to lift. You stop trying to mentally carry what only God can spiritually manage. You stop fighting invisible battles alone. You stop allowing fear to narrate your life story. In the end, when God takes over your mind, you are not just thinking differently, you are living differently. Your inner peace becomes stronger than external pressure. Your faith becomes louder than internal doubt. And your thoughts become aligned with the truth that you are guided, protected, and never abandoned. Even in moments of uncertainty, your mind remains steady because it is no longer governed by fear, but by trust in the one who sees the end from the beginning and walks with you through every season. When we talk about letting God take over your plans, we are stepping into one of the hardest areas of surrender because human nature is wired to design, predict, and control outcomes. From a young age, you are taught to plan your future, structure your goals, set timelines, and create strategies to reach the life you envision. Planning itself is not wrong, but the tension begins when your plans become your source of security instead of God. Many people do not struggle because they lack vision. They struggle because they are emotionally attached to a specific version of how their life must unfold. When life does not move according to that internal blueprint, frustration grows, anxiety increases, and faith begins to feel shaken. Yet the reality is that divine direction often unfolds differently than human expectation. And learning to let God take over your plans requires releasing the illusion that you can see everything clearly. Your perspective is limited by time, emotion, and experience. You make plans based on what you know today, but God operates from an eternal viewpoint that sees tomorrow, next year, and seasons you cannot yet imagine. What looks like a delay to you may actually be divine preparation. What feels like a closed door may be protection from a path that would have drained your purpose. When God takes over your plans, He does not always explain every redirection immediately. Instead, He invites you into a deeper trust where obedience replaces overanalysis. This can feel uncomfortable because the mind seeks certainty, and surrender removes the illusion of total control. But that discomfort is often the birthplace of spiritual growth. Many people experience internal stress, not because their life is falling apart, but because their life is unfolding differently than they expected. They had a timeline for success, a timeline for stability, a timeline for relationships, and a timeline for breakthroughs. When those timelines shift, it can feel like something is wrong. But letting God take over your plans means accepting that divine timing is not rushed by human urgency. God is not late, He is intentional. He moves with precision, even when His pace does not match your impatience. This understanding protects your heart from unnecessary disappointment and protects your mind from unnecessary pressure. There is also a deep emotional attachment people develop toward their own plans. You invest time, energy, and imagination into a vision of how things should be, and that vision becomes personal. When circumstances disrupt that vision, it can feel like a personal loss rather than a divine redirection. But surrendering your plans to God requires humility. It means acknowledging that your vision may be good, but God's vision is greater. It means recognizing that you can plan responsibly while still leaving room for divine adjustment. This balance between effort and surrender is where peace begins to grow. Another challenge in releasing your plans is the fear of the unknown. Planning gives a sense of structure, and structure provides emotional comfort. When God begins to shift your direction, you may feel uncertain because the future looks less predictable. But unpredictability in God's hands is safer than certainty built on self-reliance. You may not always understand where He is leading, but you can trust the character of the one who leads. When God takes over your plans, you are not stepping into chaos. You are stepping into alignment with a purpose that extends beyond your current understanding. It is also important to recognize that sometimes God allows your plans to fail not to punish you, but to refine you. Failure can feel painful, especially when you have worked hard and believed deeply in a specific outcome. But broken plans often reveal hidden dependencies. They expose where your confidence was placed more in outcomes than in God's guidance. When a plan collapses, it forces a deeper evaluation of trust. Are you trusting the plan, or are you trusting God? This distinction is crucial because plans can change, but God's presence remains constant. Letting God take over your plans also transforms how you respond to delays. Without surrender, delays feel like rejection or stagnation. You begin questioning your worth, your decisions, and even your calling. But when God governs your plans, delays are seen as preparation seasons rather than wasted time. Preparation often happens in hidden places where growth is internal before it becomes visible. Skills are refined, character is strengthened, and perspective is matured. If God released certain blessings prematurely, you might not be ready to sustain them. His timing is not only about giving, it is also about equipping. There is a psychological burden that comes from trying to control every outcome. Overplanning can quietly turn into overthinking, and overthinking can turn into anxiety. You replay scenarios, calculate possibilities, and mentally rehearse outcomes in an attempt to prevent failure. But this mental cycle drains emotional energy and reduces spiritual sensitivity. When God takes over your plans, you are released from the pressure of having to predict every detail. You still act wisely, but you are no longer enslaved to the need for total control. This creates mental freedom and emotional stability. Another transformation that happens when you surrender your plans is the shift from self-driven ambition to purpose-driven direction. Ambition is often fueled by comparison, societal expectations, and internal pressure to achieve certain milestones. Purpose, however, is aligned with divine assignment rather than external validation. When God takes over your plans, your motivation changes. You are no longer chasing outcomes just to prove something to others or to yourself. Instead, you begin to pursue alignment with what truly matters. This reduces burnout because your actions are guided by clarity rather than pressure. Trusting God with your plans also protects you from forcing doors that are not meant for you. When a person is overly attached to their own plan, they may push through warning signs, ignore red flags, and pursue opportunities that are not aligned with their long-term well-being. But divine redirection often closes certain paths for your protection. A closed door may feel disappointing in the moment, but it can prevent long-term regret. God's guidance sometimes appears as restriction, but that restriction is often rooted in wisdom and care. There are seasons in life where your plans will need to be rewritten entirely. Unexpected changes can disrupt your trajectory and force you into unfamiliar territory. During these moments, surrender becomes essential because resistance only increases stress. Letting God take over your plans means adapting without losing faith. It means understanding that a change in direction does not equal a loss of purpose. In fact, some of the most meaningful paths in life emerge from unexpected turns rather than carefully designed plans. Surrendering your plans to God also cultivates patience. Patience is not passive waiting, it is active trust. It is continuing to walk in faith even when the outcome is unclear. When God governs your plans, patience becomes easier because your confidence is rooted in His wisdom rather than in immediate results. You learn to appreciate progress that is gradual rather than instant. You begin to recognize that long-term stability is often built through slow, consistent growth rather than sudden success. Another powerful effect of letting God take over your plans is the reduction of internal pressure. Many people live with a silent burden of needing to have everything figured out. They feel responsible for designing a perfect future and avoiding every possible mistake. This pressure can become mentally exhausting. But surrender allows you to rest in the understanding that you are guided rather than alone. You still make decisions, but you are no longer paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. You trust that God can redirect even your missteps into meaningful growth. It is also worth noting that when God takes over your plans, your flexibility increases. Instead of clinging rigidly to one outcome, you become open to new opportunities that you may have previously overlooked. Flexibility does not mean lack of direction. It means responsiveness to divine leading. Some of the greatest breakthroughs occur when individuals release their original expectations and embrace the path God is unfolding in real time. Letting God take over your plans also changes how you measure success. Instead of defining success solely by achievements, timelines, or external milestones, you begin to value alignment, peace, and purpose. This shift protects your mental health because your sense of worth is no longer tied exclusively to outcomes. Even when plans change, your identity remains stable because it is rooted in something deeper than external progress. There is a quiet confidence that develops when your plans are surrendered to God. This confidence is not arrogance, it is assurance. You are not confident because you know every step ahead, but because you trust the one guiding your steps. This assurance allows you to move forward without constant fear of uncertainty. You learn to take action without needing perfect clarity. You learn to rest without feeling unproductive. You learn to trust without needing constant confirmation. Another dimension of surrendering your plans is releasing comparison. When your plans are self-driven, you may constantly compare your progress with others, which leads to frustration and self-doubt. But when God takes over your plans, you understand that your journey is uniquely designed. Someone else's timeline is not your timeline. Someone else's path is not your path. This realization brings emotional relief because you stop measuring your life against external standards and start focusing on faithful alignment. Ultimately, letting God take over your plans is an ongoing process rather than a single decision. Each new season presents new choices, new opportunities, and new uncertainties that require fresh surrender. There will be moments when your desire to control resurfaces, and that is human. But each time you consciously release your plans back into God's hands, your trust deepens. Over time, you begin to notice a pattern of divine faithfulness in your life. Doors open at the right time, opportunities align unexpectedly, and direction becomes clear as you move forward in trust rather than fear. When your plans are surrendered, life becomes less about rigid control and more about faithful stewardship. You still dream, you still plan, and you still work diligently, but you do so with an open hand rather than a clutched grip. This posture of surrender allows peace to coexist with ambition and faith to coexist with effort. And in that balance, you experience a deeper sense of security because your future is no longer dependent solely on your planning ability, but on the guidance of a God who understands your path than you ever could. When we talk about letting God take over your battles, we are stepping into a truth that challenges the natural instinct of human strength, because every person, by default, wants to fight their own fights. When pressure rises, the first reaction is to defend, control, respond, and push harder. You analyze the situation, strategize solutions, and try to outwork the problem. But spiritual battles are not always won through human effort, and many people are exhausted not because the battle is too big, but because they are fighting it alone in their own strength. There are burdens that logic cannot solve, conflicts that effort cannot fix, and emotional wars that discipline alone cannot silence. This is where surrender becomes powerful, because letting God take over your battles does not mean you become passive. It means you shift from self-reliance to divine dependence. Every battle you face has layers. There is the visible layer, which includes circumstances, conversations, setbacks, and challenges that you can clearly identify. Then there is the invisible layer, which includes fear, anxiety, doubt, discouragement, and internal pressure that cannot always be seen by others. Many people focus only on the visible struggle while ignoring the internal war taking place within their thoughts and emotions. This internal war often drains more energy than the external conflict itself. When you try to fight both layers using only your own strength, you become mentally fatigued and emotionally overwhelmed. But when you allow God to take over your battles, you invite a strength that is not limited by your emotional capacity or mental endurance. One of the biggest misconceptions about spiritual strength is the belief that you must always be strong on your own. This belief leads to silent struggles where individuals carry heavy emotional loads without seeking divine help. They pray occasionally, but they still mentally carry the weight of every situation if everything depends solely on them. Over time, this creates chronic stress because the mind was never designed to function as the sole protector, solver, and defender of every life challenge. Letting God take over your battles is an act of humility that acknowledges your limitations while trusting in a higher strength that does not weaken under pressure. There are battles that appear small on the surface but create deep internal tension. A harsh word, a delayed opportunity, a misunderstood situation, or ongoing uncertainty can quietly build emotional pressure. If these pressures are handled only through personal effort, they accumulate and create internal burnout. But when God governs your battles, you learn to release tension instead of storing it. Instead of reacting impulsively, you pause. Instead of retaliating emotionally, you respond with wisdom. Instead of absorbing every stress mentally, you surrender the emotional weight to God. This shift alone preserves mental clarity and emotional stability during difficult seasons. Another important dimension of letting God take over your battles is understanding the difference between control and trust. Control demands immediate resolution, while trust accepts gradual progress. When you fight in your own strength, you often demand quick results, instant solutions, and visible victories. But divine intervention does not always operate on immediate timelines. Sometimes the battle is prolonged not because you are abandoned, but because growth is taking place within you. Patience is being formed. Character is being refined. Discernment is being strengthened. When God takes over your battles, He is not only concerned with the outcome, He is also concerned with who become during the process. Emotional battles are among the most draining conflicts a person can face. Anxiety, fear of the future, regret about the past, and uncertainty about present decisions can create an invisible war inside the mind. These internal struggles often intensify during seasons of waiting, transition, or loss. You may appear calm externally, while internally you are wrestling with countless thoughts and concerns. Fighting these emotional battles alone often leads to overthinking and mental exhaustion. But when you surrender these struggles to God, the burden of constant mental defense begins to lift. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios repeatedly and start resting in the assurance that not every outcome depends on your ability to predict or control. Letting God take over your battles also changes how you perceive opposition. Without surrender, opposition feels personal and threatening. Every challenge is interpreted as a direct attack on your stability or progress. But with divine trust, opposition is seen through a different lens. Challenges become opportunities for growth rather than sources of fear. You begin to recognize that not every conflict is meant to destroy you. Some conflicts are meant to strengthen your resilience and deepen your dependence on God. This perspective reduces emotional reactivity and increases spiritual composure. There are also relational battles that can deeply affect your peace. Misunderstandings, disagreements, and strained connections can create emotional turmoil that lingers in your thoughts long after the interaction ends. If you attempt to manage every relational conflict purely through personal reasoning, you may overanalyze conversations, replay words, and emotionally exhaust yourself trying to resolve every detail mentally. But when God takes over your battles, you release the need to control every response and outcome. You still act with wisdom and responsibility, but you are no longer emotionally entangled in every reaction. This emotional detachment does not mean indifference. It means peace that is not dependent on perfect interactions. Another significant aspect of surrendering your battles is the release of internal pressure to always win every situation. Human nature often equates victory with visible success or immediate resolution. But divine victory sometimes looks like inner peace in the middle of unresolved circumstances. It can look like emotional stability during prolonged challenges. It can look like patience when answers are delayed. When God takes over your battles, your definition of victory expands beyond external results to include internal strength and spiritual growth. Fear is one of the most common weapons in personal battles. Fear exaggerates problems, predicts negative outcomes, and creates mental scenarios that increase stress. When fear dominates your internal world, even manageable challenges can feel overwhelming. But when God governs your battles, fear gradually loses its authority because trust becomes the dominant response. This does not mean fear disappears instantly. It means fear no longer controls your decisions or defines your reactions. You acknowledge the challenge, but you refuse to let fear dictate your direction. Or letting God take over your battles also protects you from emotional burnout. Continuous self-reliance in the face of ongoing challenges leads to exhaustion because you are constantly operating in survival mode. Your mind stays alert, your emotions stay tense, and your body remains under stress. Over time, this state becomes unsustainable. But when you surrender your battles, you allow yourself to rest mentally even while the situation is still unfolding. This rest is not avoidance, it is restoration. It allows you to regain clarity, emotional balance, and spiritual strength. There are moments in life when battles appear overwhelming due to their unpredictability. Unexpected changes, sudden challenges, and uncertain outcomes can create a sense of instability. In such moments, the instinct to regain control intensifies. You may try to plan excessively, react quickly, or mentally rehearse solutions repeatedly. But these reactions often increase anxiety rather than reduce it. Letting God take over your battles introduces a different response. Stillness combined with trust. Instead of reacting impulsively, you allow clarity to guide your actions. Instead of panicking about unknown outcomes, you remain anchored in the present moment with faith. Surrendering your battles also enhances your ability to discern which battles are truly worth engaging. Not every conflict requires direct confrontation. Some situations are better handled through patience, silence, and prayerful reflection. When you rely solely on personal strength, you may engage in unnecessary conflicts that drain your energy. But when God takes over your battles, you develop wisdom to distinguish between situations that require action and situations that require surrender. This discernment preserves your emotional energy and protects your peace. Another transformation that occurs when God governs your battles is the strengthening of resilience. Resilience is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to remain steady during struggle. When you fight alone, repeated challenges can weaken your confidence and increase emotional fatigue. But when you trust that God is actively involved in your battles, your endurance increases. You become less shaken by temporary setbacks because your stability is rooted in trust rather than circumstances. Letting God take over your battles also reshapes your internal dialogue. Instead of constantly thinking in terms of defeat, worry, and pressure, your thoughts gradually align with reassurance and hope. You begin to remind yourself that you are not facing challenges alone. This shift in internal dialogue reduces stress and strengthens mental clarity. Your mind becomes less reactive and more grounded, which positively influences your decisions and emotional responses. There is also a deep sense of relief that comes from acknowledging that you are not responsible for controlling every outcome. This relief does not remove your responsibility to act wisely, but it removes the unrealistic burden of trying to manage every variable in life. You still put in effort, but you not carry the emotional weight of outcomes that are beyond your control. This balance between effort and surrender creates sustainable strength rather than temporary bursts of forced resilience. When God takes over your battles, your focus shifts from constant defense to intentional growth. Instead of being consumed by the struggle, you begin to notice how challenges are shaping your patience, discipline, and perspective. You become more reflective and less reactive. You start to see that battles are not only obstacles, they are also training grounds for inner strength and spiritual maturity. Ultimately, surrendering your battles to God transforms the way you experience conflict, pressure, and uncertainty. You no longer approach challenges with the mindset that everything depends solely on your personal strength. Instead, you operate from a place of trust that allows peace to coexist with effort and faith to coexist with action. This transformation does not eliminate battles from your life, but it changes how those battles affect your mind, your emotions, and your overall stability, allowing you to move through difficult seasons with a deeper sense of calm, clarity, and enduring strength. When we talk about letting God take over your entire life, we are no longer speaking about a partial surrender or a temporary spiritual moment, but a complete shift in how you think, how you decide, how you respond, and how you live every single day. Many people are comfortable giving God certain areas of their life while quietly holding tight to others. They may trust Him with prayer, but not with their decisions. They may trust Him with their worship, but not with their worries. They may trust Him with their dreams, but not with their fears. This selective surrender creates internal tension because a divided life cannot experience consistent peace. When one part of your life is surrendered and another part is controlled by anxiety, you remain spiritually connected yet mentally burdened. Total surrender, however, brings internal alignment. It removes the silent conflict between trust and control that drains emotional and mental strength. Human nature often seeks control because control creates the illusion of safety. When you feel in charge of your plans, your future, and your outcomes, it gives a temporary sense of stability. But this sense of control is fragile because life is unpredictable. Circumstances change, opportunities shift, and unexpected challenges arise. When your life is built solely on self-control, every disruption feels like a threat. But when God takes over your entire life, your stability is no longer dependent on perfect circumstances. It becomes rooted in trust that extends beyond what you can see or predict. This trust does not eliminate responsibility. Instead, it transforms how you carry responsibility. You still act wisely, but you are no longer crushed by the pressure of trying to manage everything on your own. Letting God take over your entire life also addresses the hidden areas that people rarely talk about, such as internal fears, silent insecurities, private doubts, and unspoken worries. Many individuals appear strong externally while internally struggling with uncertainty and emotional fatigue. They function, they work, they interact, but internally they carry unresolved tension about the future, about their purpose, and about whether things will truly work out. Partial surrender allows these hidden burdens to remain, but total surrender invites God into every internal space, not just the visible ones. This creates emotional release because you are no longer hiding your deepest concerns behind external strength. Another dimension of complete surrender is the transformation of daily decision-making. Without surrender, decisions are often driven by fear, urgency, comparison, or pressure from external expectations. You may constantly question whether you are making the right choices, overanalyze every option, and mentally replay potential outcomes. This creates decision fatigue, where even small choices feel overwhelming because your mind is overloaded with responsibility for every possible consequence. But when God takes over your entire life, decisions become less about fear of failure and more about alignment with wisdom and peace. You still think carefully, but you are not paralyzed by the need for perfect certainty. Letting God take over everything also changes your relationship with uncertainty. Life naturally contains unknown elements that cannot be predicted or controlled. Without surrender, uncertainty creates anxiety because the mind tries to fill the gaps with worst-case scenarios. You imagine negative possibilities, prepare for problems that may never happen, and mentally exhaust yourself trying to secure outcomes that are beyond your control. Total surrender does not remove uncertainty, but it replaces anxiety with trust. You learn to function effectively even when all answers are not immediately clear. This ability to remain steady in uncertainty is one of the strongest indicators of a surrendered life. There is also a deep psychological relief that comes from complete surrender. Many people carry an invisible weight of needing to have everything figured out. They feel responsible for their future, their success, their stability, and their direction all at once. This constant internal pressure leads to mental overload and emotional exhaustion. But when God takes over your entire life, that weight begins to lift. You realize that you are not designed to carry the full burden of life alone. You are responsible for your actions, but you are not required to control every outcome. This distinction reduces stress and allows your mind to rest even while you continue working toward your goals. Total surrender also transforms how you handle mistakes and setbacks. Without surrender, mistakes often lead to intense self-criticism and regret. You replay past decisions repeatedly, wondering what you could have done differently, and this mental cycle drains emotional energy. But when God governs your entire life, setbacks are seen through a different perspective. Instead of being viewed as permanent failures, they become learning moments and redirection points. This perspective protects your mental health because you are no longer defined by isolated outcomes. You grow from experiences instead of being mentally trapped by them. Letting God take over your entire life also influences your emotional stability. When life is partially surrendered, emotions fluctuate heavily based on circumstances. Good news brings temporary peace, while challenges bring intense stress. But with total surrender, emotional balance becomes more consistent because your inner peace is not fully dependent on external situations. You still experience emotions deeply, but they no longer dominate your sense of security. You become less reactive and more reflective. You pause before responding. You process situations with clarity instead of immediate emotional intensity. Another powerful effect of complete surrender is the alignment between your inner beliefs and outward actions. When your life is divided between trust and control, your actions may contradict your faith. You may say you trust God while internally worrying constantly about outcomes. This internal contradiction creates tension that affects both your mental and emotional well-being. But when God takes over your entire life, your thoughts, words, and actions gradually align. You begin to live with consistency rather than internal conflict. This alignment creates a sense of wholeness that strengthens both your confidence and your peace. Total surrender also reshapes your priorities. Without surrender, priorities are often influenced by comparison, societal expectations, and pressure to meet certain standards. You may chase achievements that do not truly fulfill you or pursue paths that are driven more by external validation than internal purpose. But when God takes over everything, your priorities shift toward meaning, growth, and purpose. You become less concerned with proving yourself to others and more focused on living in alignment with what truly matters. This shift reduces unnecessary stress and prevents burnout caused by chasing unrealistic expectations. Another important aspect of letting God take over your entire life is the development of patience. Modern life encourages instant results and quick solutions, which makes waiting feel uncomfortable and frustrating. Without surrender, delays are often interpreted as failure or stagnation. But with total surrender, waiting becomes a season of preparation rather than a season of frustration. You begin to understand that growth often happens in unseen ways before visible results appear. This understanding allows you to remain steady even when progress feels slow. Complete surrender also affects how you handle success. Without surrender, success can create pressure to maintain a certain image, status, or level of achievement. You may feel the need to constantly perform and prove your worth, which leads to continuous mental strain. But when God takes over your entire life, success is no longer a source of pressure, but a platform for purpose. You appreciate achievements without becoming emotionally dependent on them. Your identity remains stable regardless of external accomplishments. Letting God take over everything also deepens your sense of identity. Many people define themselves based on their roles, achievements, or circumstances. When those external factors change, their sense of self becomes unstable. But with total surrender, identity becomes rooted in something deeper than temporary roles or outcomes. This creates inner security because your worth is not fluctuating with every life event. You remain grounded even during transitions and changes. There is also a profound sense of freedom that comes with complete surrender. Freedom from constant overthinking, freedom from excessive worry about the future, and freedom from the mental burden of trying to control every detail of life. This freedom does not mean irresponsibility. It means operating from trust rather than fear. You still plan, you still work, and you still strive for growth, but you do so with an open heart instead of a tense mind. Total surrender also strengthens resilience during difficult seasons. Challenges do not disappear, but your capacity to endure them increases. Instead of collapsing under pressure, you remain anchored in trust. Instead of reacting with panic, you respond with patience. Instead of feeling abandoned during hardships, you feel guided through them. This resilience is not based on personal strength alone, but on the assurance that your life is not unfolding randomly. Letting God take over your entire life also improves your mental clarity. When your mind is not overloaded with the responsibility of controlling everything, you think more clearly and make wiser decisions. Stress decreases, focus improves, and emotional balance becomes easier to maintain. You become less distracted by unnecessary worries and more present in your daily responsibilities. Ultimately, complete surrender is not about losing control of your life in a negative sense, but about releasing the burden of trying to manage everything without divine guidance. It is about trusting that your life is being directed with wisdom that surpasses your limited perspective. When God takes over your entire life, you do not become passive or directionless. Instead, you become more intentional, more peaceful, and more aligned. Your actions are guided by clarity rather than fear. Your decisions are shaped by wisdom rather than pressure. And your life moves with a sense of purpose rather than constant anxiety, allowing you to walk through every season with deeper peace, stronger faith, or fear, and a stable inner confidence that does not collapse under the weight of uncertainty.